Imagine an old, long-defunct factory suddenly coming back to life. The machines whir by themselves. The figures of deceased workers are still visible sewing. On the outskirts of an industrial city stands the BlackWood textile mill. It has been abandoned since the 1980s, a silent witness to an era of hard work and exploitation. The paint is peeling, the windows are cracked, and the musty, rusty smell lingers in the air. Last year, a new company bought it. They said the old machines were still usable. Dozens of new workers were hired. They were happy to have jobs, but from day one, something felt wrong. Mr. Nolan, a senior foreman in his 52nds, was the only old staff member recalled. His face was always tense, staring at the building. "The machines here aren't just iron and bolts," he muttered one afternoon. "There's something still inside." Leo, the know-it-all young technician, just laughed. "They're machines, sir. They just need to be serviced." Mr. Nolan turned, his gaze sharp. "You don't understand, Leo." The first day, everyone was busy cleaning the production room. Thick dust, scraps of rags, and rust were everywhere. They started up a few machines to test. Then, the first thing happened. An old sewing machine, which we'll call Machine 7, suddenly started spinning by itself. Strangely, the cord wasn't plugged in at all. The sound of the needle sewing was loud and rhythmic. Everyone was silent, pale. "Who turned this on?" shouted Sarah, a warehouse worker. The other technicians could only shake their heads. "No way, Sarah. The cord is still unplugged." There was silence. The only sound was the machine, as if someone invisible was intently sewing there. Mr. Nolan immediately stepped forward and pulled the main power switch on the wall. The machine stopped instantly. That night, Mr. Nolan worked late alone. He wanted to lock all the rooms. As he passed through the dark production hallway, his ears caught a faint sound. The machines hummed again, softly, accompanied by the sound of fabric being dragged across the floor. The fluorescent lights on the ceiling flickered. "Who's there?" Mr. Nolan shouted. There was no answer, but the distinct sound of a sewing machine, needle-piercing fabric, could be heard rhythmically, coming from machine 7 inches the corner of the room. Carefully, Mr. Nolan stepped inside. Machine 7 was moving again on its own. Its wheels spun, the needle bobbing up and down. A long white fabric moved forward under the needle. But what made Mr. Nolan choke was the silhouette of a woman sitting at the machine's bench, hunched over, sewing quietly. Her hair fell over her face. The uniform she wore was shabby, but it was clearly a factory worker's uniform. "Hey, who are you? Why are you still working so late at night?" Mr. Nolan called, his voice trembling. The figure didn't look up, just kept sewing. Her hands moved quickly. The sound of the machine grew louder. As soon as Mr. Nolan was only a few meters away, the fluorescent light above his head went out. It was pitch black. The machine stopped. Mr. Nolan panicked, fumbling for the light switch. When the lights came back on, the chair was empty. There was no one there, just a roll of white cloth, torn at the edges, as if it had been freshly cut. Mr. Nolan stepped back, gasping for breath. He was sure his eyes weren't deceiving him. The ghost of the old worker, whom we called Elara, was still working there. A few days later, the factory was tense again. Sarah, a warehouse worker, was assigned to check the fabric stock in the back warehouse. The warehouse was older, with a leaking roof and mossy walls. It smelled musty and musty. Sarah entered and walked among the rolls of fabric stacked head high. Suddenly, the fluorescent lights overhead went out briefly, then came back on. Sarah turned her head. She heard the sound of fabric being dragged across the floor, coming from the dark warehouse hallway. "Leo? Is that you?" she called. There was no answer. Then, another sound emerged. The sound of an old sewing machine from the production room, as if someone were turning it on somewhere far away. The sound grew clearer, getting closer. As Sarah was about to leave, the lights in the warehouse suddenly flickered on and off repeatedly. As darkness briefly engulfed the room, and then the lights came back on, Sarah stopped frozen. Sitting on top of one of the large fabric machines was a long-haired woman. Her clothes were shabby white. Her hair hung loose, covering part of her face. Her blank eyes stared straight at Sarah. Her legs dangled, swaying slowly, as if enjoying the horror. The figure didn't move, just stared blankly. The sound of the machine stopped, but was replaced by another sound. A soft, high-pitched laugh that echoed throughout the warehouse. Sarah screamed hysterically. Her notebook fell, her body went limp, and then she fainted instantly. A few minutes later, Leo and Mr. Nolan arrived. They found Sarah lying on the ground. Mr. Nolan looked toward the fabric machine. There was no one there. But on the floor, near the machine, were 3 drops of a thick, black liquid that didn't seem to be water. Mr. Nolan knew it wasn't a hallucination. The ghost Sarah had seen was what the old workers had described as a female spirit hiding in the high places. This factory wasn't just inhabited by the spirits of workers tied to the machines. Something much darker had been lurking there for a long time. Since Sarah's collapse, the atmosphere in the factory has grown increasingly tense. None of the workers wanted to work overtime, but a large order had to be completed. One night, the sound of the machines was heard again, even though no one had turned them on. This time, it was in the main production room. Leo, curious but afraid, dared to approach. From behind the door, he saw Machine 7 spinning by itself. The large metal wheels moved quickly. The fabric was dragged in. The needle rose and fell rapidly. "Who turned it on?" he whispered. He took a slow step, but Machine 7 suddenly screeched to a halt. It was silent. Then, the wheels of the machine began to move again at a faster speed. The sound was like the roar of a hungry animal. Just then, Mr. Nolan came rushing in. "Leo, back off!" But it was too late. The long cloth on Machine 7 was suddenly sucked in with force. The end of the cloth wrapped around Leo's arm. The machine's pull dragged him along. "Sir, help!" Leo screamed. Mr. Nolan and 2 other workers ran to help. They tried to turn off the main switch, but the machine wouldn't stop. Instead, it revved up, as if refusing to stop. Leo screamed in pain. His right arm was nearly completely rolled up. The fabric tore, and blood splattered onto the floor, and the metal of the machine. Mr. Nolan grabbed a metal crowbar near the machine and struck the metal wheel of Machine 7 with all his might. A loud bang echoed. Only after the 3rd impact did the machine stop abruptly. Leo fell to the ground, his hands covered in severe cuts. Mr. Nolan stood frozen, staring at the silent machine. Leo's bloodstains were still visible on the wheel. And most bizarrely, the fabric that had been rolled up formed a pattern resembling a screaming human face. Everyone felt goosebumps. This Machine 7, we knew, was the Predator machine. A few weeks after the incident, 7 workers were forced to work overtime, including Leo and Sarah. Mr. Nolan joined the watch. At 11 p.m., the air in the room suddenly turned piercingly cold. Suddenly, the iron door at the end of the hallway slammed shut. It was locked, but from the inside. They tried all the doors, but the result was the same. An invisible force had trapped them. Amidst the panic, strange sounds arose. Machines hummed by themselves. Fabric dragged. Then, a long, soft, female laugh could be heard. As if mocking us trapped, the lights went out completely. At the end of the row of machines, the shadow of a person walked. Not one, but many. They moved slowly, as if at work. Human forms with pale faces and empty eyes. They repeated the same old routine: sewing, stacking fabric, cutting materials. Invisible workers bound to the factory. One of the figures turned. His face was bloodied, his hands rolled up in a long cloth. He stared straight at us. The 3 of us, Mr. Nolan, Leo, and Sarah, knew we couldn't just work. This factory was going crazy. That very night, after the locked door incident, Mr. Nolan decided to investigate the basement. The room had once been an archives warehouse, rarely touched. We entered through the back hallway. The old iron door creaked, and the smell immediately greeted us. Musty, rusty, mixed with a strange scent, like old blood. Mr. Nolan pushed aside a pile of wooden planks in the corner. Dust flew up. Behind them, a blackish-brown stain could be seen on the concrete floor. "What is this, sir?" Leo asked, his voice choked. Mr. Nolan stared at the stain for a long moment. "Many workers used to die here," he said quietly. "Accidents, exhaustion, some deliberately covered up. Their bodies were hastily buried in the back of the factory, all to cover up the company's shame." The atmosphere was frozen. Only the sound of dripping water from the ceiling could be heard. Suddenly, the air in the room turned piercingly cold. The flashlight flickered, almost going out. From the darkness, faint sounds could be heard. Moans, cries, cries for help. Shadows appeared on the walls. Figures of laborers in tattered work clothes. Their faces were mangled and scarred. Some had severed arms, others had their bodies wrapped in rags, and others had heads covered in blood. They moved slowly, surrounding us. "They demand justice," Mr. Nolan said, his voice firm despite his trembling body. "As long as this truth is buried, they will never rest." One of the figures approached. His face was broken, but his voice was clear, ringing directly in our ears. "Don't let us be forgotten." Then, all the shadows suddenly stopped. They bowed their heads, then faded slowly into the darkness. The 3 of us managed to get out of there. We knew the truth, and it was more terrifying than any ghost. This factory was built on suffering. The factory was still operating. The machines were still churning. But everyone who knew its secrets knew. It was no longer just a production space. It was a thin gateway between life and death, where the spirits of the workers were trapped, demanding that their stories not be forgotten. Mr. Nolan, Leo, and Sarah were safe. But they knew the revenge wasn't over. It was only a matter of time before the Predator machine found another victim.